All right, so this will be a little more detailed briefing as we get a little bit closer. We're able to get into some of the higher res models and get a little better timing for you for tomorrow, and maybe start to see some things and maybe hone in on it. So again, the main points. Again, the increasing severe threat for Sunday for all of North and Central Georgia. There was some slight changes to the outlook, and I'll cover that in just a second on the next slide. But the primary threat, we have a main line, squall line, that will be coming through during the day tomorrow. Damaging winds. There will be tornado potential with the line itself, potentially along with some storms ahead of it. Still a little uncertain whether or not we'll see many storms out ahead of it, but that's certainly a possibility. And then heavy rain as well, about 1 to 2 inches with this line primarily as it comes through. There is a secondary hail threat, and that's mentioned on the next, and that's under the caveats here. If we do have any discrete cells, bowing segments, or breaks within the line, and I'll cover that briefly a little bit later as well. If we have any of those things, that's where we might expect a little bit higher of a tornado threat within the line. There's a lot of shear, especially in the low levels as the line comes through. Typically, when we get that kind of shear that we've got in the low levels with a line of storms, it doesn't take much to translate that into a quick spin up. We are expecting a secondary line of storms with the actual cold front to come through Sunday afternoon, so we'll see some redevelopment in the Sunday afternoon. I do have some slides on that as well. With that secondary line, the tornado threat goes down a little bit. It's not zero, but the hail threat starts to increase with that secondary line as the atmosphere becomes a little more conducive for hail during the afternoon hours, and we may have a chance to heat up a little bit. So as the first line moves through in the morning. The timing, we're still looking at early morning for areas west of I-85, and then noon to 9 p.m. or so along and east of I-85. And that noon to 9 does encompass that secondary line, because you'll get a secondary line to develop, especially north of I-20. Again, I'll cover that later. And then the 6 to 12 is for the first line west of 85, but again, west and north of 20, west of 85, north of 20, we're looking at redevelopment in the afternoon. Again, I got a little better timing on that as well. So the latest outlook, this was just issued within the last half hour or so. For SBC, they did not make any changes to the day 2 that was issued. But if you may recall, the day 3 actually had an enhanced risk for just about the entire warning area and much of Georgia. They've lifted a lot of that enhanced threat north a little bit, so it's north of, say, LaGrange to Eatonton, and encompasses most of North Georgia, including the metro, for the enhanced. Doesn't mean the threat's any less down to the south, but certainly there's a lot greater dynamics in play further north with the upper level support moving away, and so it's a little closer. So the enhanced risk is for all of north. We will see this obviously change as we transition into the day 1 outlook. That's usually issued around 2 a.m. With the day 1 outlook, we get a lot of the other probability information that we have discussed with some of you in the past. The individual tornado threat, the hail threat, and the wind threat. If you want to see what that looks like, go take a look at the moderate risk that's to the west of us in Louisiana, in the Arklatex region, and scroll over and you can see the different threats, how they break them down, and the probabilities for those. But we'll get that with the day 1 that's issued tonight. So here's a look at the severe levels and the confidence. The only thing I really bumped up is I did bump up the tornado threat a little bit. There's some suggestion that we could have some spin-ups within the line, especially from the higher res models. It's trying to indicate that, not to mention that it looks like there might be some breaks in the line, and those are usually conducive for some quick spin-ups within the line itself. Damaging wind threat we left alone. That still looks like it's the greatest potential. There's a lot of wind with this system. It's just a matter of translating that wind down to the surface, and we can see some damaging wind. I reduced the rainfall flooding threat a little bit. It's really 1 to 2 inches is really in the far north Georgia, so the flood threat really looks to be isolated across the far north, 1 to 2. Everybody else is generally an inch or less, especially south of I-20. And then hail, the hail threat comes in in the later afternoon. Again, these may be adjusted with time as we start to get into the day one and we see how things are evolving. So general sense of timing, and again, I'll go through this with some models here in a second, but 6 a.m. to 12, I think we were going 6 to 2 yesterday. We were finding a little bit entering the northwest at 6 and then getting over to the eastern side of this box, generally between 10 and 12 p.m. We will see some redevelopment, especially north of I-20, in the 3 to 6 p.m. window with a secondary line that develops in the actual cold front. So the threat isn't over with the first line necessarily. So that's something we'll have to watch out for. The area in the light blue, 12 p.m.-ish to 9 p.m., and that does encompass the second round. And we're looking at that round getting, again, primarily north of 20 after 6 o'clock. So, and that 9 o'clock would be in the far southeast. The primary threats with the second round, again, hail and damaging winds. Can't rule out a brief spin-up tornado. There is still some low-level shear, but there's a lot more wind with the secondary line, especially wind aloft coming in behind as the main trough starts to move in. They should be clear of the entire area by late tomorrow, late Sunday night, sometime between 9 and midnight or so. We should see most of that stuff move out. Far eastern Georgia, outside of our area, may still be dealing with a little bit, but our area for the most part will be done. So let's digest a little bit of the timing here. This is one of the high-res models, and you'll see on the far left, 6 a.m., it's got a squall line approaching the state, entering sometime between 6 and 8 p.m., and the other thing you'll notice within this, and I got it on the third one on the far right there, if you look at some of these stronger embedded cells that might be, it's trying to indicate within the line itself. These are things we'll have to watch for in the warning mode and where they are within the line itself. But these are the ones that would pose the threat as they come in, either a bowing segment or stronger rotation within the line itself as it rolls in. Obviously, damaging winds and tornadoes, primary two threats, small hail and brief heavy rain with the line itself. So you can see the progression 6, 8, and 10 a.m., 10 a.m. approaching the 85 corridor, plus or minus about 2 hours. Timing isn't perfect or exact here, but it's a pretty good estimate. So give you an idea of what you're looking at tomorrow morning. Stepping forward, let's go to 12 p.m., gets past the 85 corridor. Again, still pointing out, and I got it on the arrow there, you can still see some of the stronger storms the model's trying to pick out within the line. This doesn't mean they're going to be in these locations, but these are the things we're going to be looking for throughout the day tomorrow. You can see by 2 p.m. the line is getting through Macon and south central Georgia. And then by 4 p.m., we're starting to get it cleared of the south or of our eastern. This is just one model. The other thing I'm pointing at here on this graphic is more potential development in the northwest with the actual front. This model isn't developing it as much as some of the other models that we're looking at, and I've got that in just a second. But this is a secondary line that we're going to be watching develop with the front moving across the north. How far south it gets, still up in the air. This thing could extend all the way down past I-20, but nonetheless, that's going to be the round two. Clear this. Things to watch for. These are I guess I'll call them gotchas. Things we're going to be looking for. Little inside baseball look. But number one, the further south extension to the redevelopment in the afternoon. I just mentioned that. This is one particular model. If I go back a slide, take a look at this bottom left graphic. You'll see that it extends way south of the I-20 corridor with the line as it redevelops. It's a little bit stronger as well. This is a different model than the one you just saw. Oops. And if you look here on this slide, if I went back a slide, you'll see it's much further north and doesn't look nearly as intense. So these are one little thing we're going to be watching for with that secondary line. what you see is the remnant first line on this particular model during the afternoon hours. Number two, Gulf Coast convection. Oftentimes when we get storms, if they tap into a lot of the instability that builds up down on the Gulf Coast, we will get a complex of storms down here that ends up cutting off the inflow in the sort of the feed to the storms to the north. This can actually have an impact on the intensity of the storms to the north, because with the way the winds are going to be blowing, all the tops are going to be blowing off to the north and east, and that sort of caps the ability of the storms to the north to really get going. And sometimes this happens and we don't get quite the storms we were expecting. It would be a good news situation because we wouldn't see as much widespread severe weather across our region, but doesn't mean it's going to happen. Yesterday, some of the models were indicating that it could happen. Today, they're not as bullish on it, and so it's just something we'll have to watch, and we don't really know it's going to happen until you start to see it set up in the early morning hours tomorrow morning or on the day of. Number three, let's see, we'll get to the next slide. Embedded bowing segments in the squall line, breaks in the line. These are areas that will create an increased risk for damaging winds and or tornadoes. And so, again, we don't always know where they're going to be, but those are the things to look for and to watch for as the line approaches. And then the fourth thing to watch for and gotcha is faster timing. Sometimes these lines can accelerate a little bit faster than what the models are showing, and so our timing could be off plus or minus a couple hours. Like most of the time, it's it's a little faster, not slower, but that's not always the case. But again, something to watch for. So the timing I showed you previously may not be exactly representative based on the speed of the storm themselves. Rainfall, I mentioned that with the 1 to 2 quick inches, and again, that looks mainly confined north of 85 and 20. You can see everything in the blues across the far north from Rome to Gainesville. That's in that 1 to 2 category. The other blue, the royal blue color, that's like up to an inch, generally around an inch, and then the greens are generally about a half an inch or so. So again, the heaviest rain looks to be largely across the far north. Could result in a localized flash flooding threat, but again, we don't think that one's going to be as high as some of the other threats, especially with the winds. Speaking of winds, we're going to be issuing a wind advisory for tomorrow. We have out ahead of this system, again, I mentioned earlier, it's a very windy system, a lot of winds aloft, and a lot of that's going to be mixing down to the surface ahead of the storm tomorrow. So we're going to see gusty winds 30 to 35 miles an hour widespread across the region. Could get some gusts near 40 in the North Mountains and maybe some isolated other spots. Peaking late morning into the afternoon. Sorry, I didn't finish the text on this, but late morning into the afternoon on this. Could result in some isolated trees down and power outages, possible with just these winds alone without any storms, just because it's going to be so windy and gusty during the afternoon tomorrow, again, ahead of the system itself. So in summary, again, the increasing threat for the storms late tomorrow. Look for the main line to come through, damaging winds and tornadoes with it. Again, be on the lookout for discrete cells, bowing segments, or even the breaks in the line, which we'll be watching for as we go into warning ops. Look for that secondary band of storms Sunday afternoon, more of a large hail and wind threat with that one. And then again, timing I mentioned, feel better about the timing, 6 a.m. to noon west of 85, noon to 6, noon to 9 along and east of 85. That 9 p.m. gives you that secondary line as it comes through from 6 to 9 p.m. And then for the northwest portion of the state, again, after 3 to 6 p.m. for that secondary line that's going to develop, or most likely going to develop tomorrow afternoon. So future updates, we will get you an email update overnight. However, because we're going to be transitioning into a warning operations early Sunday morning as the line approaches, we'll be relaying information and updates real time through either NWS chat or on social media. So as we transition into the morning after the last email overnight, I would recommend you follow the social media feed and or in NWS chat for any updates or questions you may have, since we're going to be transitioning to that morning ops. And that was the last slide. The briefing slides should be on that page that's listed here. I loaded them about 10 minutes before the briefing. I did not verify that they were there, but we can check in a second. Otherwise, if you have any questions, we got the questions box up, and we'll go ahead and take some questions.